The hidden banquet. The grand hall of the dragons was alive with fire and shadows. Golden lamps shaped like claws burned along the walls, sending orange light across stone pillars that reached higher than any tower. The air was thick with the smell of roasted meat and the smoke of spiced wine. Huge wings folded and unfolded as dragons of many clans gathered for the emperor's banquet. Their scales glittered like jewels, their horns curved like blades, and their voices rumbled like thunder. Among them, moving quietly and unnoticed, was a human girl named Elara. She worked as a waitress, carrying silver trays stacked with fruit, bread and wine. She wore a plain dress, her hair tied back, her eyes lowered as she moved between tables. The rules were simple, the warnings clear. Never look into a dragon's eyes, never touch what belongs to them, and above all, never touch their young. She had heard the punishments for those who broke the rules, and she never wished to test them. But on this night, something unexpected happened. The banquet was loud with laughter, claws striking the table, and fire bursting from mouths in cheer. Near the head of the hall, upon a cushion of silk, lay a small dragonling, the child of the emperor himself. Its scales were pale and dull compared to the others, its wings weak and folded, its breath shallow and tired. The other dragons glanced at it with pity or disgust, whispering that the emperor's heir was broken. Elara passed by carrying a tray, her eyes fixed on the ground, but in the corner of her vision, she saw movement. The small dragonling had slipped from its cushion, its fragile body collapsing onto the cold stone floor. It tried to rise, but its legs shook, its wings dragging uselessly. And while the banquet roared with noise, not a single dragon reached to help. Elara froze, her heart pounding. She knew the rules, she knew the danger, but instinct pulled at her like fire. She set down the tray, knelt to the floor, and lifted the dragonling into her arms. It was lighter than she expected, trembling like a frightened child. She cradled it against her chest, whispering softly as she would to a baby. "Hush, you are safe." The hall fell silent. Every dragon turned, their glowing eyes fixed on the human who dared to break the sacred rule. Claws scraped stone, wings twitched, and low growls echoed across the chamber. Alara's breath caught in her throat, but she did not let go. The dragonling pressed closer into her arms, its weak body relaxing as if comfort had found it at last. From the head of the table, the dragon emperor rose. He was larger than all the others, his black scales burning with hints of red fire, his eyes like molten gold. The ground shook with every step as he moved forward. His shadow fell across Elara, covering her in darkness. The other dragons bowed their heads in fear, but the emperor's gaze never left her. Elara trembled, her knees weak, but she held the baby dragon tighter. She expected rage, fire, death. But instead, the emperor spoke in a low, rumbling voice. "Why?" he asked, his eyes narrowing. "Why does a human dare to hold what is mine?" Elara swallowed, her voice shaking. "Because no one else would," she whispered. The words echoed in the silent hall. The dragons gasped. Some growled in anger, others sneered at her boldness. But the emperor tilted his massive head, studying her with something other than fury. His gaze shifted to his child in her arms, the weak dragonling, who now purred softly for the first time. He saw the way it pressed into her, the way it found comfort only in her touch. And for the first time in years, the emperor felt confusion. The silence broke as dragons muttered, demanding her punishment, calling her foolish and unworthy. Yet the emperor lifted his claw, silencing them all. His golden eyes returned to the girl. "You are not like the others," he said slowly. "You did not look away." Elara lowered her head, fear pressing down on her chest. But her arms did not loosen. Her grip did not falter. The emperor's gaze softened, though his voice was still heavy as stone. "From this moment, you will remain by his side," he commanded. Gasps filled the hall. Dragons roared in protest. wings thundering in disbelief, but no one dared to defy him. Alara's heart pounded as she realized the weight of what had just been spoken. Her life, once quiet and hidden, had just changed forever. The baby dragon stirred in her arms, lifting its weak head to nuzzle against her shoulder, and though fear still filled her, Alara felt something stronger, a bond, fragile yet undeniable. She did not know what it meant, or what fate awaited her, but she knew one truth, clear and sharp. From this night onward, she and the Dragonling were bound, and the Dragon Emperor had seen it with his own eyes. The Emperor's gaze, the banquet hall still trembled with silence. The air hung heavy, as dragons of every clan stared at the human girl, holding the Emperor's heir. The fire in the lamps hissed low, shadows twisting across the stone walls like nervous serpents. The baby dragon purred softly in her arms, a sound so small it seemed to mock the fear pressing down on everyone else. The Dragon Emperor stood at the center, his form towering above them all. His black scales glowed faintly with inner fire. Every step he took, leaving cracks in the marble floor. His molten golden eyes were locked on Alara. She knelt at his feet, trembling, her arms tight around the fragile creature. Every heartbeat sounded like a drum inside her chest. She waited for fire, for claws, for death. Instead, the Emperor lowered his massive head, his nostrils flaring as he studied her. The scent of human fear filled the air, but beneath it, he sensed something else. Not defiance, not trickery, but sincerity. His deep voice rumbled through the hall, shaking the tables and rattling the chains of chandeliers. "You dare touch what belongs to me?" he asked, his tone neither raw nor whisper, but something heavier. Alara's lips trembled, but she whispered back, "I could not leave him on the floor." Gasps rippled through the dragons, their scales rattling with outrage. One hissed, "She mocks you, my emperor." Another growled, "End her life now." But the emperor raised a single claw, silencing them instantly. His eyes did not leave hers, glowing brighter as though searching her soul. The baby dragon shifted in her arms, pressing closer, letting out a weak chirp that echoed across the chamber. For the first time, the emperor saw his child respond, not to dragons, not to healers, but to this human. He leaned closer, so near that his golden eyes reflected in her own. The heat from his breath rolled over her like fire. "Do you know what they say of him?" the emperor asked, his voice softer now. Alara shook her head, her arms still wrapped around the trembling creature. "They say he is broken," the emperor whispered. "Too weak to fly, too weak to breathe fire, unfit to rule." The words rolled heavy, filled with bitterness. Alara dared to look up, her voice faint but steady. "He is not broken," she said. "He only needs care." The hall erupted in roars, dragons bellowing at her insolence. Wings struck the air, claws gouged the stone. The sound was like thunder crashing in waves. But the emperor did not roar. He did not strike. He simply watched her. And for a long moment, there was only silence between them. In her eyes, he saw no hunger for power, no fear of death, only simple truth. It was this truth that unsettled him more than any enemy had. The dragons demanded punishment, voices overlapping. "She shames your throne," cried one. "She insults your bloodline," shouted another. But the emperor's tail struck the ground with a force that silenced all. The hall shook, dishes and cups flying from tables. When the echoes faded, his words rumbled like a mountain collapsing. "She will remain," he declared. "My son has chosen her." The dragons recoiled in disbelief. "No human may stand beside royal blood," one hissed. The emperor's golden eyes burned brighter, his voice like fire in the wind. "Do you question me?" he roared. The very walls shook, dust falling from the high arches, and no dragon dared to answer. All bowed their heads, tails coiling tightly beneath them. Alara's breath came fast, her knees weak. She could barely believe what had been spoken. She had expected to die. But instead, she had been bound to a fate she did not understand. The baby dragon nuzzled against her arm, a spark of warmth running through her chest. It was not just comfort, it was connection, something deeper, something ancient. She felt it even as the Emperor's gaze pierced her. That night, when the banquet ended and the hall grew quiet, the Emperor summoned her again. The firelight cast his massive shadow across the chamber as he circled slowly. Alara stood trembling, the baby dragon still in her arms. "You do not understand what you have done," he said, his voice low. Alara lowered her head, whispering, "I only wish to help him." The Emperor's golden eyes narrowed. "And yet you have awakened something no healer, no priest, no dragon ever could." He stepped closer, his claws scraping the stone, sparks flying as if the earth itself feared him. "My child responds to you, human, and for that I will allow you to live," he said. "But know this, your life is no longer your own." Alara felt her chest tighten, her breath unsteady. The weight of his words pressed on her like chains. "Still," she whispered, "then I will not leave his side." The Emperor stopped, his head lowering once more. His golden eyes burned like fire, but softened just enough to show something hidden beneath. For years he had hidden his sorrow, his fear of a weak heir, his shame before his people. And now, in the arms of a fragile human, that heir had found strength. The Emperor turned away, his wings spreading as he moved back to his throne. "Very well," he said. "From this night, you belong to him, and through him, you belong to me." Alara stood frozen, her arms tightening around the small dragon. Her life as a simple waitress was gone, replaced by a destiny she could not have imagined. The dragons glared, the hall rumbled, but only the Emperor's gaze mattered. A gaze that saw her not as a servant, not even as prey, but as something else, something dangerous, something necessary. And in that gaze, Alara realized her fate was sealed. The silent bond. The banquet was over, but the memory of that night did not fade. Alara was no longer just a servant carrying trays and cleaning cups. She now carried the Emperor's fragile heir in her arms, watched by 1,000 suspicious eyes. The hall that once ignored her now burned with whispers about her fate. Dragons slithered close to one another, muttering low, "She will fail." Some hissed, "She will break." Others growled, but none could deny what they had seen. The heir had purred in her arms, something no dragon healer had ever made happen. The Emperor had returned to his throne, silent and brooding. His golden eyes followed her every move. Though his face revealed nothing, he had spoken only one command, and it echoed in her mind. "You belong to him now." Alara was taken to a chamber at the far end of the hall. It was not a prison, yet it felt like one. The walls were carved with dragon symbols. Glowing faintly in the torchlight, a bed of soft furs was laid for the child. Yet the dragonling refused to leave her arms. Its small claws clung to her dress, its eyes half shut but glowing faintly. When she tried to set it down, it whimpered, a weak sound that made her chest ache. So she sat with it through the night, holding it close. The fire in the room dimmed, and soon she drifted into uneasy sleep. And that was when the bond revealed itself, in her dreams. Alara stood not in her chamber, but in a vast cave of fire and crystal. Flames danced along the walls, glowing brighter with every heartbeat. She looked down, and the dragonling was at her side, walking proudly, its wings whole, its eyes sharp. It lifted its head and spoke, not with its mouth, but with a voice inside her mind. "You are not afraid of me," it whispered. Alara gasped, falling to her knees. You can speak," she whispered back. The dragonling's glowing form tilted its head. "I could always speak, but none ever listened." She woke with a cry, the chamber still lit by dim torches. The baby dragon stirred in her arms, nuzzling against her chest, Her hands trembled as she touched its head. "Was that real?" she asked softly. The dragonling only purred, but in her heart, she felt the answer. The days that followed were filled with testing eyes. Other servants stared in silence. Dragons muttered from the shadows. The emperor himself visited often, watching in silence as she carried his child. He never asked questions, never gave praise, but his golden eyes always followed, and each time, the dragonling clung tighter to her, refusing to leave her side. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, Elara sat with the child in the courtyard. The sky glowed red, and the air carried the scent of smoke and flowers. The dragonling shifted weakly, trying to spread its wings. It failed, stumbling, but Elara steadied it, her hands gentle. "You can do it," she whispered. "I believe in you." The dragonling looked up at her, its glowing eyes reflecting the fading sun. For a moment, she felt the warmth of fire surge through her chest. Not her own fire, but his. The bond pulsed stronger, and in that instant, she understood. The child was not only leaning on her, it was sharing itself with her. That night, the dreams returned, clearer and brighter. She stood again in the crystal cave, but now the dragonling's wings glowed faintly. It walked taller, its voice sharper in her mind. "You see me as I am," it said. "Not broken, not cursed." Elara's throat tightened, tears filling her eyes. "You are not broken," she whispered. "You are precious." The dragonling pressed its head against her leg, firelight glowing around them, and Elara woke with wet cheeks. The small dragon purring against her heart. The bond was no longer silent. It was alive. By the third week, the whispers in the hall grew louder. Dragons accused her of witchcraft, of trickery. "No human should carry the heir," they hissed. "She is poisoning his blood." Others spat, but whenever the emperor appeared, he silenced them with a single glance. He had seen the bond with his own eyes, and he could not deny it. Elara herself began to change. She felt warmth in her blood, a strange strength in her breath. Her dreams bled into waking hours, and sometimes she thought she heard the child's voice. Even when awake, "You are mine," it would whisper gently, "and I am yours." One evening, as the banquet fires lit again, Elara carried the heir into the hall. The dragons turned in silence, watching as the baby nestled in her arms. It lifted its head weakly and released a tiny spark of fire. The first flame it had ever made. The hall gasped, the sound echoing like thunder, and in that moment, Elara knew the bond was no longer just a secret. It was a challenge to everything the dragons believed. The emperor's eyes blazed with golden fire as he rose from his throne. His voice rumbled across the hall. "Let all who see know this. My heir has found strength." He turned his gaze to Elara, unblinking, and the strength comes from her, the human question. The spark of fire from the baby dragon had changed everything. What was once whispered in corners was now shouted in the open. Dragons who once ignored the fragile heir now stared at him with burning eyes, not because of his strength, but because of the human girl who carried him. The council of elders gathered in the great hall, ancient dragons with scales faded like stone, their wings scarred from wars long past. They circled the emperor's throne, their voices sharp and heavy. "This is an insult," one growled, his voice shaking the pillars. "No human may touch royal blood," hissed another, smoke curling from her jaws. "She is a servant, nothing more, and yet she holds what even we could not heal." The emperor sat silent, his golden eyes blazing like suns. Elara stood at the edge of the chamber. The baby dragon pressed against her chest. She felt their stares like knives, each word meant to cut her down. Her hands trembled, but she did not loosen her hold. The child purred softly, its warmth giving her courage. One elder stepped forward, his claws gouging the stone floor. "She is dangerous," he thundered. "She is twisting the heir's spirit. poisoning him with her weakness. Gasps rippled through the chamber. Dragons nodding in agreement. The elder turned his glowing eyes on Alara. If she remains, your throne will fall. My emperor. The hall grew tense, the air thick with smoke and fire. Alara wanted to speak, to defend herself, but her voice froze in her throat. Then the emperor rose, his massive form shaking the chamber. He spread his wings wide, their shadows stretching across the floor like storms. His voice rolled like thunder, silencing all. You speak of poison, but you are blind, he roared. My son breathes because of her. My son burns because of her. And you dare call it weakness? The elders recoiled, their tails lashing the ground. Never before had the emperor defended a human. Whispers spread like sparks, dangerous and restless. Alara felt her knees weaken, but the emperor's words lit a fire in her chest. She looked down at the baby dragon, who lifted his head and nuzzled against her chin. The bond pulsed stronger, almost daring her to speak, and for the first time she did. Her voice trembled, but it carried through the chamber. I did not come here to take your power, she said. I only gave him what he needed. Love, care, and patience. The dragons growled. Some laughed bitterly. What does a human know of care? One spat, but the baby dragon released a tiny spark again, curling smoke rising into the air, and the hall fell silent. The emperor's eyes narrowed, his gaze sweeping across his people. You call him broken, yet he grows stronger with her, he declared. You call her unworthy, yet she holds what none of you could hold. His voice dropped low, sharp as steel. Perhaps the question is not whether she is worthy, but whether you are. The words struck the council like fire to dry wood. Some roared in fury, others lowered their heads in shame. The human question was no longer about Alara alone. It was about pride, about tradition, about whether dragons could accept what they had always denied. That night, Alara sat alone in her chamber. The baby dragon slept in her arms, glowing faintly with inner warmth. But her heart was heavy, her mind replaying the council's words. She whispered softly, They will never accept me. They will never see me as anything but a servant. The dragon stirred, opening its glowing eyes. In her mind, his voice echoed faintly. They do not need to accept you. Only I do. Tears filled her eyes. She stroked his small wings, whispering, But how long can I stand against them? The dragonling pressed closer, his fire pulsing against her heart. You are stronger than you know, he whispered. And for the first time, she believed it. The next morning, the emperor summoned her privately. The throne room was empty, save for torches and shadows. He studied her silently as she entered, her arms still cradling his child. You spoke before the council, he rumbled. Few would dare such a thing. Alara lowered her head, her cheeks burning. I only spoke the truth, she whispered. The emperor leaned closer, his golden eyes burning brighter. Truth is dangerous, he said, but it is what makes you different. He circled her slowly, his claws scraping the stone. For years I have feared my heir would never rise, that my throne would die with me, he said. And yet you, a human, have done what none of my kind could. His voice softened, almost like a growl hidden under sorrow. You remind me of something I had forgotten. Hope. Alara looked up, her chest tightening. The dragon emperor, the most feared being in the world, spoke of hope as if it was rare, fragile, precious. And she realized in that moment that his gaze was not just on her. It was on the future, on a bond that could change everything. The human question still echoed in the halls. But in the emperor's eyes, the answer was already clear. She was no longer just a servant. She was part of the destiny of dragons. The test. The emperor's words silenced the council for a time. But whispers did not die. They only grew sharper in the shadows. Dragons muttered that the human had bewitched the heir, that her bond was trickery, that her presence was a danger to their throne. The elders pressed the emperor in private, demanding proof. "If she is truly chosen by your son, let her prove it," they hissed. "Let her face the caverns of fire." The caverns of fire were not a place for mortals. Even dragons feared them, for the air burned like molten stone, and the paths were filled with rivers of flame. It was said that only those with true strength of spirit could walk the caverns and emerge alive. The elders believed she would fail. They believed the fire would consume her, and with her death, their traditions would be safe. The emperor listened in silence, his golden eyes unblinking. At last he spoke, his voice low and heavy. "So be it," he declared. "The human will walk the caverns, not alone, but with my heir." When Alara heard the command, her heart froze. She had faced stares, whispers, even threats, but never this. The caverns of fire were spoken of like a death sentence. Still, when she looked down at the baby dragon in her arms, she knew she could not refuse. If she turned away, the child would be taken from her, and that she could not allow. The day of the trial came quickly. The dragons gathered at the mountain's base, their wings folding like black sails against the red dawn. The caverns yawned open before them, a mouth of fire breathing heat that scorched the air. The emperor stood tall above them all, his gaze fixed on Alara. She trembled, sweat already dripping down her skin, but her arms tightened around the heir. The baby dragon pressed close, purring faintly, sharing its warmth with her. "Enter," the emperor commanded, his voice echoing like thunder. Alara stepped forward, each breath burning her lungs. The moment she crossed the threshold, flames curled around her like serpents. The heat was unbearable. The ground cracked beneath her feet, but she did not stop. The baby dragon stirred weakly, lifting its head, its glowing eyes locked on hers. In her mind, his voice whispered, "Do not fear, I am with you." She pressed on, her dress clinging to her skin with sweat. The cavern walls glowed like living embers. The air shimmered like a furnace. Her legs shook, but she took each step carefully, cradling the child as though he were the only cool thing in that burning world. The flames roared louder, the heat pressing like 1,000 claws. Her vision blurred. Her body begged her to fall, but the dragonling's tiny claw touched her chest, and a surge of warmth, not fire, but strength, spread through her. "I will not let you fall," his voice whispered. Further inside, rivers of molten stone flowed across the path. The air crackled with sparks, the heat blinding. She stared at the river, her heart pounding, her feet refusing to move. "No one can cross this," she whispered. But the dragonling shifted in her arms, his weak wings twitching. "Trust me," he whispered in her mind. She stepped forward, the fire licking at her legs. But as she did, the glow from the dragonling spread around her like a shield. The flames bent away, forming a narrow path through the inferno. Her eyes widened, but she kept moving, step by step, her breath ragged, her body trembling. Behind her, the dragons watching from the cavern mouth gasped. None had ever seen such a thing. The human was not consumed. She was walking as though the fire itself bowed before her, and the emperor's golden eyes narrowed with something rare, pride. At last, Alara stumbled into the inner chamber. The flames rose higher here, spiraling like living towers of fire. The baby dragon lifted his head, his eyes burning brighter than before. "This is where I must breathe," he whispered. Alara's throat tightened, her arms shaking. "You can," she whispered back. "I believe in you." The dragonling opened his mouth, a tiny spark at first, then a stream of flame poured forth. It cut through the cavern, merging with the fire around them. The walls shook, the flames roared, and the air trembled with power. For the first time, the air of the emperor breathed true fire. Alara fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. She held him close, whispering, "You did it." When they emerged from the caverns, Silence fell over the gathered dragons. Alara staggered, her dress singed, her face streaked with sweat and ash. But in her arms, the air glowed with new strength, his small wings twitching, his fire still burning faintly in his throat. The Emperor stepped forward, his massive shadow falling over them. He looked down at Alara, then at his child. His voice rumbled across the mountains. "The human has done what none of you believed," he declared. "She walked the fire and gave my son his flame." The dragons bowed their heads, some in awe, others in shame, and though many still whispered against her, none could deny the truth. The test had been given, and she had passed. That night, as the stars burned bright above the mountains, Alara sat with the Dragonling beside her, his body warm, his breathing stronger. For the first time, she felt not only fear, not only duty, but hope. Hope that she was no longer just a human servant. Hope that she and the child had changed something no fire could destroy. The revelation, the caverns of fire had changed everything. Alara had walked where even dragons feared to tread. She had carried the Emperor's heir through rivers of flame, and together they had awakened his first breath of fire. The whispers in the hall no longer questioned her strength. They questioned her purpose. The Emperor summoned her to the inner sanctum, a place even many dragons had never seen. It was a chamber carved deep in the mountain, its walls glowing with ancient runes that pulsed faintly like living light. Torches burned blue here, their flames silent, their heat cool. Alara entered with the baby dragon in her arms, her heart beating fast. She felt as though she was walking into the heart of something far older than empires. The Emperor stood waiting, his massive form hunched beneath a ceiling carved with stars. The golden glow of his eyes reflected off the runes, making them shimmer. He turned as she entered, his gaze falling first on his child, then on her. "You have walked the fire," he said, his voice low, "and yet you stand unburned." Alara lowered her head, whispering, "I only held him. I only refused to let go." The Emperor's wings shifted, scraping stone. "And that is what none of us could do," he rumbled. "We measured him with pride. You measured him with love." He lowered his head, his nose nearly touching the child. The baby dragon lifted his small wings and gave a faint chirp, a spark curling from his mouth. The Emperor's golden eyes softened in a way Alara had never seen. "This fire," he said, "is more than strength. It is prophecy." He gestured with one great claw, and the walls of the chamber blazed brighter. The runes shifted, glowing in spirals and shapes, forming pictures carved by claws long gone. Alara gasped as she saw them. Dragons and humans standing side by side, fighting against shadows that covered the sky. In the carvings, humans held flames in their hands, not stolen, but shared by dragons. "This is the truth our kind buried," the Emperor said, his voice heavy with both pride and sorrow. Long ago, humans and dragons were bound as one, their hearts linked, their strength shared. He turned his gaze on her, sharp and burning, but greed ended it, pride shattered it, and we swore never to trust your kind again. Alara's chest tightened as she stared at the glowing carvings. Her voice trembled. "But why show me this?" The Emperor's wings shifted again, shadows curling across the glowing walls. "Because the bond has returned," he said. "Because you and my son have awakened what we thought lost forever." Alara looked down at the Dragonling, who nuzzled against her arm. His glowing eyes met hers, and she felt the warmth pulse again in her chest. The same warmth she had felt in the fire, the same voice she heard in her dreams. It was not only comfort, it was connection. Something older than fear, stronger than blood. The Emperor's voice rumbled, breaking the silence. "You are not only his guardian now, you are his flame-bearer." Alara's eyes widened, her heart racing. "What does that mean?" she whispered. The Emperor lowered his head, his voice sharp as stone. "It means your lives are tied, your fates are one. His fire will grow through you, and through you, he will rise." her breath caught, her knees weakening beneath the weight of his words. She had been a servant, nothing more. Now she stood in a place of prophecy, tied to the destiny of dragons. Her hands trembled as she held the child tighter. "I am only human," she whispered. "How can I carry this?" The Emperor's gaze burned into hers. "You already have," he said simply. That night, Alara dreamed again, but the dream was not like before. She did not stand in the crystal caves, nor the banquet hall. She stood among the carvings themselves, alive and moving. Humans stood side by side with dragons, their flames joined as one. And among them, she saw herself, holding the heir whose wings now burned strong. The shadows roared, but together, human and dragon roared louder, and the dream ended in fire and light. When she woke, the baby dragon stirred in her arms, his glowing eyes fixed on hers. "You saw it too," his voice whispered in her mind. Alara's eyes filled with tears. "Yes," she whispered. "I saw it." The next morning, the Emperor addressed the court. His voice thundered across the hall. "Let all here know, the prophecy lives again, and its flame rests in my son, and in this human." The dragons roared, some in fear, others in anger, others in awe. The hall shook with their voices, wings striking the air, claws scraping stone. Alara stood small among them, but her arms were strong around the child. And for the first time, she did not tremble. She knew the truth now. She was no longer servant, no longer outsider. She was part of a bond older than empires, a bond that could either save their world or burn it down. The new bond, the prophecy had been spoken. The Emperor's words echoed through the great hall, heavy as thunder. "Let all here know, the bond has returned, and its flame rests in my son, and this human." The chamber erupted with voices. Some dragons roared in rage, some in disbelief, and some in awe. The elders hissed and snapped their jaws. "This cannot be," one bellowed. "No human may carry the blood of prophecy." Another slammed his tail against the ground, sparks flying. "If you crown her guardian, you spit on our pride, you break our law." The air grew thick with heat, scales scraping stone, wings unfurling. It was as though the hall itself trembled with the weight of choice. Alara stood at the center, small among giants. The baby dragon nestled in her arms, glowing faintly with new strength. She felt the stares like fire against her skin, yet she did not falter. Her heart beat fast, but the warmth in her chest held her steady. The Dragonling's voice whispered in her mind, "Calm and sure. Do not fear them. You are mine, and I am yours." The Emperor rose from his throne, his shadow covering the hall. His wings spread wide, blocking the firelight. The golden blaze of his eyes swept across his people, sharp and merciless. "You call her unworthy," he roared. "Yet you saw the fire she awakened." His voice shook the very stones. "You call her weak, yet she carried what none of you could." He lowered his head toward Alara, his gaze steady. "You call her human, I call her chosen." The hall fell silent, every dragon shrinking under the force of his words. No one dared to answer. No one dared to roar. Only the sound of the baby dragon's soft purr filled the chamber. It was small, yet it carried more power than all their anger. The Emperor's gaze returned to Alara. "You were a servant," he said, his voice low but clear. "You walked unnoticed, carrying trays for those who never saw you, never named you." He leaned closer, his golden eyes burning into hers. "But now you stand before dragons as guardian of my heir, and from this day, your name will be spoken with fire." Alara's throat tightened, tears stinging her eyes. She had never dreamed of such words, never dreamed of standing in such a place. Her arms tightened around the Dragonling, who lifted his small wings and let out a faint spark. The light flickered across the hall, and in that light, she saw dragons bow their heads. Not many, not all, but enough. enough to know the world had already begun to change. Still, the eldest dragon hissed one last challenge. If you crown her my emperor, she will bring ruin. The prophecy is curse, not gift. The emperor turned slowly, his golden eyes sharp as blades. Then let ruin come, he growled, for I would rather face ruin with truth than live forever in lies. With that, he lowered his massive head before Elara. The whole gasped, dragons recoiling in shock. Never had the dragon emperor bowed to a human. His voice rumbled deep and steady. By fire and by blood, I name you guardian of my son, flame-bearer of his line. Elara fell to her knees, trembling. The weight of his words pressed on her like mountains. Yet in her heart, she felt not fear, but strength. She whispered softly, I will protect him, always. The baby dragon pressed his head against her chest, his glow brighter than ever. The bond blazed. Unbreakable, undeniable, the whole roared. Not with rage this time, but with fire. Dragons lifted their wings, some in protest, some in respect, some in surrender. The prophecy was no longer carved on stone. It was alive, breathing in the heart of a fragile human. And a dragonling, once thought broken. That night, as stars burned above the mountains, Elara stood with the child in the courtyard. The emperor watched from the shadows, his golden eyes softer than before. You have changed him, he said, and you have changed me. Elara turned, her voice quiet but steady. I only gave him what he needed. The emperor's gaze lifted to the stars, and in doing so, you gave us all something we had forgotten, hope. The baby dragon stirred, stretching his wings. For the first time, they did not falter. They caught the air, a weak flap, then another, and Elara laughed through her tears, holding him close. You will fly one day, she whispered. The dragonling's voice echoed in her mind, strong and sure. And you will fly with me, the prophecy had returned. Not through pride, not through strength, but through the quiet bond of a human heart and a dragon's flame. And from that night onward, nothing in the kingdom of dragons would ever be the same.